Hello, this is Freethought Forum. Maybe you should say the first part.
It's a forum for a program for atheists, Society of Knoxville, and the rationalists of East Tennessee.
And I think I can pronounce my name. I am Melissa Brenneman.
And I'm Joe Barnhart. And today we're going to do what?
We're going to speak to you about gender issues, and we invite you to start calling in now.
Yeah, gender issues. And you can see the number on your screen. And we will, if we have time, have some announcements. But let's get started with agenda. And that's our agenda is gender.
Our agenda is
started
gender.
With it because we want to get call-ins on this from our listeners. Go.
What if I start with a discussion of gender and sex?
Good deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the difference between sex and gender is frequently misunderstood, and in many contexts the terminology is interchangeable. But for this discussion we can talk about sex as being biologically determined in various ways, mostly by the XX or XY chromosome, but also with the appearance of sex organs and secondary characteristics. But sex can be ambiguous, and we tend to forget that and think of it as either or. But in cases of intersex, which can arise in a lot of different ways, sex can sometimes be assigned surgically and backed up with hormones, and then a corresponding gender is reinforced by parents. So gender then is more difficult to define, but that term is borrowed from linguistics when we talk about certain words in languages having a male or female gender. So that term was borrowed from linguistics to try to get at other aspects of male and female issues. And it's understood differently based on context.
In fact, it's interesting to see what baggage or excess has been put upon the biological distinction. For example, at least one time in his life, Aristotle thought the female was the passive part of the human race and the male was the active. And then there were those who thought the active part was the intellectual side. That came as a blow to my ego when I was teaching in my second year of teaching in a course in modern philosophy, and the person who knocked the top out of the class persistently was a woman who happened to be pregnant at the time.
Oh, for shame.
And I was teasing all the guys, you can't really say she's a male in disguise because she's not pregnant. I mean, she's pregnant. So they got a good kick out of having to shift their own thinking. There was a time when women were not permitted to take philosophy.
Correct, correct. So most social scientists now, I believe, try to define or operationalize their discussions of gender as they go along, but we can think of it in terms of a social performance. Or we can talk about gender as a verb being a process that's so powerful that it makes itself seem as if it's natural.
Yeah, in fact, the Apostle Paul seemed to think it was natural for the male, the husband, to be the head of the woman. He said that Christ is the head of the church, God's the head of Christ, and the husband the head of the wife.
Ephesians.
Yeah, and then what's interesting is that that's in 1 Corinthians, I think. He does another thing in Ephesians if he wrote that. But what's interesting is later the church in the Nicene Creed and the Chalcedonian Creed contended that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit were co-equal. But they didn't bring that down to the husband and wife being co-equal. They did, however, say that Christ is head of the church, but the church speaks for Christ and for God. But they didn't say the wife the wife speaks for the husband. They
forgot.
They left that piece of logic out.
Just an oversight, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure.
Well, these unequal power relations within marriages are at the root of a lot of trouble, I think, between men and women.
Yes. Yeah, and it's I had a experience with working with a woman in writing, and we were teasing each other. I was taking the female role of wild, creative, intuitive, and she was logical and rigorous. And we were saying, this doesn't work. It's not supposed to be this way. As a matter of fact, in the Bible is the book of Hebrews, or Epistle to the Hebrews. It doesn't say who wrote it, and there was a lot of speculation, one of which is a woman wrote it. But some church fathers said, no, it's too logical. But that's part of that old tradition, you see, that women could not think logically. That, of course, and then, of course, if you don't send them to school, don't let them be educated, and keep them constantly pregnant, then they're not going to be educated. Mm-hmm. At least in the things that Aristotle and others thought they should be.
Mm-hmm. I personally see patriarchy as more the problem here than religion per se. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to point out that the term patriarchy derives from a religious context. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, mm-hmm. then followed by the patriarchy of ecclesiastical hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my own personal leaning is to be against a hierarchy in many forms, not just patriarchy, but especially patriarchy.
Well, the Catholic Church is conspicuously a male club hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And the president of the Southern Baptist Convention recently contended with a group of the brothers that a woman could not be a senior pastor. Now, she could be a minister as long as it's a kind of a serving position, religious educators, but not the senior, because that's a position of authority. And mm-hmm. as a matter of fact, in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in the 1950s, birth control was considered to be murder.
Right.
Now, it didn't specify what the punishment would be. Mm-hmm. See, that's what's interesting to me, the lack of consistency, logical consistency these males didn't follow through with. They did quote the passage, some of them did, of Onam in the Bible who spilled his seed on the ground, and then God, according to this tale, murdered him. Well,
in this case, though, I personally am just afraid mm-hmm. to death of more consistency in that way of thinking, because I think we need to really hold on to what we have gotten in the way of access to birth control and reproductive health. So I'm not going to be urging anyone to be more consistent in their beliefs and practices there. What do you?
Well, then some of the Mormon hierarchy and some of the Mormon lay people have actually considered in Utah the possibility of passing a law on abortion and reckless miscarriage as a punishment for life imprisonment.
Oh, my.
And I think the goal of some of these men is to execute women who practice abortion. This is a form of bullying, intimidation, and terror. It's a vicious, and it's not just religion. This is deeper than religion. This is just human aggression toward other people.
Yes.
And what's interesting is trying to make a fetus, which has no conscience, no thoughts about anything, somehow a person, but treating the female as if she's less than a person. That's what the issue is really about, it seems to me.
Well, shall we talk about some instances in which religious groups do work to break the mutually reinforcing relationship and interplay between religious traditions and gender oppression? I do have some examples.
Yeah, good, would you? Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, we may have a...
We have a call?
Yeah, let's go. Let's hear your call, please.
Hello.
Go. We're listening.
Hello?
Oh, my name is Andre.
Andrea.
And I would like to know if you have any idea of why men are so set on controlling women and considering them second-class citizens. I mean, it's been a history of so many societies. And why do you think that is? Why are they afraid of women?
I can't imagine. I'm so non-threatening.
Let me give a guess. Part of it is competition for jobs. If you can knock out 50% of the race, roughly 50%, then you don't have to compete for a job as much. Furthermore, in a society in which they were constantly battling with other tribes and killing off mostly their males, they had to keep producing more. It never occurred to some of them maybe to learn to build bridges and not go to war so much. But also men had big shoulders and women had smaller shoulders, and they could bully women a lot easier. And then most of women, you got to keep in mind, for centuries, were either carrying a baby in their arms or in their belly, so they could not literally fight back. So they were bullied.
I guess in agreement with your last point about bullying, it's just my perspective that power corrupts. And I suppose to some extent the power that comes naturally from a superiority in physical strength may have been originally the corrupting factor.
Let's see if our speaker our caller has some comment on this. Get some more input.
Well, it's been something that's concerned me because I never could really figure it out. One thought I always had was that men were jealous of the fact that women actually carried babies, could have babies, which is something they couldn't do. And so they had to control them. But I don't know, that's just my own.
You know, what is funny is Freud had the notion of penis envy.
Yeah, well, I think it's the opposite. I think it's womb envy on the part of men. Okay, that's all I have to say. I'll say goodbye.
Thank you for calling.
It's well put. Thank you. Are there other callers?
Well, I'll get back to what I wanted to say about the relationship of religion and gender oppression. I don't think that to be religious has to mean you have this strict differential in gendering. And so I'd like to point out some ways in which that's broken. In comparative historical studies, we see that generally women have been able to hold higher positions in archaic, tribal, non-institutionalized religions, and not so much in traditions that have evolved complex structures and hierarchical organizations over a long period. And yes, I am implying that religions evolve. Women were much more powerful than they became later on. In the early days of the Jesus cult, in Buddhism, and among early followers of Muhammad, in new religious movements within older traditions such as Christian Science within Christianity.
Yeah, let's take our call, then we'll get back to that. Hello, caller. Can you hear us? Please give us your comments or questions.
Yes, I want to place had on the screen. A lot of people don't believe in God. Well, you know, you get up in the morning and breathe the air, and they see the flowers and the birds and everything in the earth. You know, you wonder why they don't believe in God, and you also wonder why, if they don't believe,